turned 40 on a Tuesday in March, and everything seemed perfect. My husband Marcus brought me flowers and we went to dinner at the Italian restaurant we both loved. I remember looking at him across the table and thinking how lucky I was. We had been married for 15 years. We had built a home together. We had a life that worked. But there was something different about him that night. He kept checking his phone. He seemed distracted. When I asked if he was okay, he said yes, everything was fine. I wanted to believe him, so I did. What I didn't know was that my husband had been keeping secrets from me for years. What I didn't know was that his entire family had been having conversations about my future without including me in them. What I didn't know was that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs. His mother had started calling more often, asking strange questions about the house, about our finances, about my work schedule. His sister had been visiting more frequently, walking through rooms like she was inspecting them. But I was busy with work. My mother was getting older and needed more of my time and attention. I didn't pay close enough attention to what was happening around me. That Tuesday night, as Marcus walked me to our car, I felt happy. I felt safe. I felt like my life was exactly what I wanted it to be. I was wrong about almost everything. The small moments started happening just weeks after my birthday. I came home from work one afternoon to find Marcus's mother in my living room, rearranging my furniture. She had let herself in with a spare key that Marcus had apparently given her months ago without telling me. "I'm doing this for better energy," she explained, moving my favorite reading chair to the other side of the room. She said this like it was the most normal thing in the world, like she had the right to make changes to my home without asking my permission. I wanted to tell her to stop. I wanted to say that this was my space, my home, and she couldn't just change things whenever she felt like it. But I didn't. I was raised to be polite to my in-laws, to keep the peace, to not make waves. So I smiled and thanked her and helped her move the furniture back when she left. Then his sister started visiting every few days. She would walk through the house like she was taking inventory. She would open cabinets and comment on how I organized them. She would look in the refrigerator and suggest better ways to arrange things. She would stand in the middle of rooms and say things like, "This really could be something special if you did it differently." My husband would laugh when she said these things. He would make jokes about her being bossy, but he never told her to stop. He never said, "This is my wife's home, show some respect." He just let it happen. The comments started bothering me more than I expected them to. It wasn't just about the furniture or the organization. It felt like a violation. It felt like they were slowly claiming ownership of something that belonged to me. My mother died on a cold November evening in a hospital room that smelled like cleaning supplies and sadness. I held her hand as she took her last breath. My husband was there, but he stood in the corner of the room. He didn't hold me. He didn't cry. He just waited for me to be done so we could go home. The grief was enormous. It swallowed me whole. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I would wake up in the middle of the night forgetting she was gone, and then I would remember all over again, and the loss would hit me fresh every single time. My husband tried to be supportive, but he didn't know how. He would pat my shoulder awkwardly. He would ask if I wanted anything to eat. He would sit next to me while I cried, but he wouldn't really be there. It was like he was going through the motions of being a good husband without actually understanding what I needed. The morning after the funeral, his mother came to our house. She found me in the kitchen drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I was staring out the window at nothing. She sat down across from me, and her voice was very gentle when she spoke. That's what made what she said so dangerous, because it sounded like concern. It sounded like she cared. "This house is too big for you alone," she whispered, like she was sharing a secret. "A woman your age living in such a large space, especially now that you've lost your mother, that has to be overwhelming." I looked at her without really understanding what she was saying. "I'm not alone," I said. "Marcus is here." "Yes," she said, and there was something in her smile that I didn't like. "But is he really? When he's at work, you're alone. When he's traveling for business, you're alone. That can't be good for you. Not right now. Not when you're grieving." Those words planted something in my head. something that would grow and spread over the following weeks. What if she was right? What if I was being selfish by wanting to stay in this big house? What if the best thing for me would be to simplify my life? That night, I mentioned her comment to Marcus. I thought he would tell me she was being ridiculous, but he didn't. He got very quiet. He said maybe she had a point. Maybe we should think about the future differently. But why? Why would we suddenly need to think about anything differently? After my mother's funeral, his family started showing up all the time. They would arrive without calling first, appearing at the door like they had every right to be there. They would walk into my kitchen like they owned it and start cooking. They would use my ingredients, my pots and pans, my space, without asking permission. My husband's sister began hosting family meetings in my living room. She would invite his parents, his brother, sometimes other relatives. They would sit around my coffee table and talk about things in quiet voices. When I tried to join them, they would stop talking immediately. There would be an awkward silence, and then they would change the subject to something neutral. I felt like a ghost in my own home. The house that Marcus and I had chosen together, that we had painted and decorated and filled with our life, was being slowly taken over by people who didn't respect my space or my presence. I would hide in the bedroom sometimes just to escape them. I would turn the volume on the television up loud and pretend I couldn't hear them downstairs. I started spending more time at work, even though there wasn't really extra work to be done. I just didn't want to come home. One evening, I came back from running errands to find Marcus's entire family in the dining room. They were looking at photographs of the house on an iPad. They were talking about the neighborhood, about property values, about how much the house could potentially sell for if it was renovated in certain ways. When they saw me, the conversation stopped immediately. Everyone looked up at me like I had caught them doing something wrong, which I had. "What are you all doing?" I asked, even though I could see exactly what they were doing. "Nothing, dear," Marcus's mother said very sweetly. "We're just making conversation." But I knew they were lying. And the fact that they lied so easily, so smoothly, without even blinking, terrified me. Marcus told me about the loan on a Wednesday evening. He sat down on the edge of our bed and said he needed to tell me something important. His voice was serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. Years ago, he explained, before we even got married, his family had given him money, a significant amount of money. They said it was for his future, for our future together. They were being generous. They were being supportive. But there was a condition. He had to put up our house as collateral. Not eventually, not someday. Right from the beginning, when we first bought it. He had to sign documents that his family had prepared. Documents that gave them the right to claim the house if he couldn't pay back the money by a certain date. I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. Our house, the house I loved, the house we had put our life into, it was being used as leverage for a debt that I didn't even know existed. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, and my voice was shaking. Marcus wouldn't look at me. "Because I knew you'd be upset," he said. "Because I knew you'd say I shouldn't have done it." "You're right," I said. "I would have said that, because it's insane, Marcus. You can't use our home as collateral without telling me. That's not how marriage works." "I know," he said quietly. "But at the time, I thought it would be fine. I thought I'd pay it back quickly and they'd release the lien and no one would ever need to know about it." "But you didn't pay it back," I said. It wasn't a question. I could see the answer in his face, in the way he was avoiding my eyes. "Not quickly," he admitted. "We've been making payments, but we're behind. The due date is coming up and I don't have all the money saved." I felt dizzy. I felt like the floor had shifted under me. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about our security, about our future, suddenly seemed uncertain. "What does your family want?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "They're being patient," Marcus said, "but they want to know what our plan is. They're asking questions about the house, about our finances. They want to know if we could sell it if we needed to." I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Marcus in the dark and asked question after question. Why had he never told me about this? How much money were we talking about? When exactly was the deadline? What had his family said would happen if he couldn't pay? Marcus gave me vague answers. He said he didn't think it mattered anymore because they were family and family didn't actually hold each other to these kinds of agreements. He said his parents had probably forgotten about it by now. He said everything would be fine. But I could hear in his voice that he didn't believe any of it. And I could see now, looking back at the previous weeks, that all of his family's strange behavior had been related to this. They weren't just being nosy. They were checking on their investment. They were making sure the property was still valuable. They were planning something. Over the next few days, I asked Marcus for more details. He reluctantly provided them. The loan was substantial. Not huge, but significant enough that it would take time and careful planning to pay back. The deadline was about 18 months away, and his family had been hinting in recent conversations that they wanted their money back. The worst part was what Marcus told me about what they had suggested. They thought he should sell the house. They thought he should pay them back immediately, and then we could use whatever was left to buy something smaller, something cheaper, something that didn't carry the weight of this debt. But this was my home. I had decorated every room. I had planted the garden. I had made memories here. This wasn't just real estate. This was where my life happened. When I asked Marcus what he wanted to do, he said he didn't know. He said we would figure it out together. But even as he said those words, I understood that he meant something different. I understood that he was already considering what his family wanted. I understood that I was about to lose. Marcus asked me to come into the living room on a Thursday evening about a week after he told me about the loan. When I got there, I found his entire family waiting for me. His mother, his father, his sister, his brother. They were arranged on the furniture like they had been planning this meeting, which they had been. His mother started speaking before I even sat down. "We want to talk to you about something," she said, and her voice was sweet. Poison usually is. "We've been thinking about your situation." My situation. As if my life, my marriage, my home, was some kind of problem that needed to be analyzed and fixed by these people. "We understand that you're grieving," his mother continued. "We understand that losing your mother has been very difficult, and we think that staying here, in this big house, spending all your time maintaining it and worrying about it, might not be what you need right now." I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the floor. "We have a suggestion," his sister said. "We think it would be really good for you to take some time. Move somewhere smaller, somewhere easier to manage, somewhere where you don't have to worry about all the upkeep. Let Marcus stay here and manage the house. He could hire someone to help with the maintenance, and you could just focus on healing from your mother's death." "What comes next?" I asked. "After I heal?" "Well," his mother said carefully, "once you're feeling better, we can talk about what makes sense for everyone. Maybe you come back. Maybe the situation changes. We'll see how things develop." No one mentioned the loan. No one mentioned that they owned a legal claim to my home. No one admitted that they wanted to take it from me. They just presented this plan like it was a generous offer, like they were being kind and thoughtful and helpful, like they had my best interests at heart. But I could see through it. I could see what they were really saying. They were asking me to leave my own home. They were asking me to voluntarily remove myself from the situation so they could do whatever they wanted without me in the way. That night, Marcus and I had the worst conversation of our marriage. I asked him directly if he agreed with his family's suggestion. I asked him if he actually wanted me to leave our home. "They think it would be good for you," he said, not answering my question. "They think you need time away. They think the stress of maintaining this house and dealing with your grief is too much." "What do you think?" I asked. "Not what they think, what do you think?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He got up and walked into the kitchen. I followed him. I grabbed his arm and forced him to turn and face me. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked again, louder this time. "No," he said, but his voice was so weak that it sounded like a lie. "But maybe they're right. Maybe you do need some space." "You're supposed to defend me," I said, and I could feel the tears starting. "You promised when we got married that you would stand by me. You're supposed to stand up for me against your family. You're supposed to choose me." Marcus pulled away from me. "I'm stuck," he said, and he sounded so tired. I owe my family money. I made a mistake years ago that I don't know how to fix, and you're making this harder." Those words broke something inside me. In his mind, I was the problem. My wanting to stay in my own home, my wanting him to love me more than he feared his family, my wanting him to be my partner instead of his parents' son, all of that was making things harder. I went upstairs without another word. I pulled out a suitcase. I didn't plan to leave, but suddenly I was throwing clothes into a bag and I couldn't stop. My hands were shaking. My vision was blurred with tears. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just reacting. Marcus didn't follow me. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't fight for me. He just stayed downstairs and let me leave. I spent the night at a hotel. I lay in a bed that didn't smell like home and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. I wanted to call Marcus and tell him I was sorry, that I would come home, that we could figure this out. But I also knew that coming home meant accepting what his family wanted. It meant being complicit in whatever was happening. The next day, I drove back to the house. I had convinced myself that maybe things would be different. Maybe Marcus had realized his mistake. Maybe he would fight for me. Maybe he would tell his family that this was our home and we weren't going anywhere. I pulled into the driveway and saw that nothing had changed. The house looked the same. The garden I had planted was still there. The blue door I had painted last summer was still there. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. I pulled out my key. It didn't fit the lock. My key didn't work. I tried it again, pushing it in harder, turning it more forcefully, like if I just tried hard enough it would suddenly work. But the lock had been changed. The house had been locked against me. I knocked on the door. His sister opened it. She was smiling, and that smile made me feel like I was going to be sick. "You don't live here anymore," she said, very calmly, like she was stating a simple fact. Then she closed the door in my face. I stood there in shock. I knocked again, harder this time. I could hear movement inside. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, but no one came to the door. I called Marcus. He didn't answer. I called again, and again. My calls went to voicemail. I sat down on the porch steps. I had one suitcase. One suitcase contained the few items I had grabbed in my panic before leaving. Everything else was in that house. My clothes, my books, my photo albums, my life. I sat on the curb for hours. A police officer eventually stopped and asked if I was okay. I told him what had happened, but he said that since my name was on the deed, I could call a lawyer about it. He couldn't force my way into the house, but I had legal rights that I could pursue. I drove to a coffee shop and used the Wi-Fi to search for lawyers. My hands were shaking as I typed. I tried to think clearly about what I needed. I needed someone who understood property law. I needed someone who could help me understand if what they had done was legal. I needed someone who could help me get back into my own home. I called several lawyers. Most of them wanted me to come in for a consultation. Most of them wanted to charge me money I didn't have. But then I called Ms. Chen, and something about her voice made me feel like maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe what was happening to me was actually wrong. "Tell me what happened," she said, and she actually listened while I talked. She didn't interrupt me or rush me. She let me tell the whole story. When I was done, she asked some specific questions about the property, about my marriage, about the loan. "Did your name go on the deed when you bought the house?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Both of our names are on it. We're both owners." "Then they can't lock you out," she said. "That's illegal. What they did is a violation of your property rights. Come to my office tomorrow. We need to talk about what you can do legally." That night, I stayed at my best friend Nicole's house. She had been my friend since college, and she had always been there for me. I told her everything, and she held me while I cried. She made me soup even though I couldn't eat it. She let me use her shower and gave me clean clothes. She told me I would get through this, that she would help me, that everything would eventually be okay. But sitting in her guest bedroom that night, I couldn't imagine how anything would ever be okay again. My marriage felt over. My home was gone. My life had fallen apart, and I had no idea how to put it back together. The next morning, before I went to meet with Ms. Chen, my neighbor Mr. Patterson approached me outside Nicole's house. I didn't know his name at the time. We had waved at each other a few times over the years, but we didn't really know each other. He was an older man, probably in his 70s, with kind eyes and white hair. "I know this is strange," he said quietly, "but I've been recording some things at your house. I have a security camera, and I've been watching what's been happening. I knew something wasn't right." He handed me a small flash drive. "I don't understand," I said. "Videos," he explained, "of your family coming and going, of them talking outside. I couldn't hear everything, but I could hear enough. I thought you might need this as evidence." I was shocked. This man, this stranger, had been paying attention to something wrong and had taken action to help me. He didn't owe me anything, but he cared enough to do this. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt completely inadequate. "Thank you so much." Ms. Chen reviewed the videos while I sat in her office. She watched them in silence, occasionally pausing to write something down. Her office was small but professional. There were diplomas on the wall and stacks of legal files on her desk. When she was finished, she turned to me. "They cannot legally remove you from your home," she said. "This house is joint marital property. Your name is on the deed. Regardless of any loan agreement, regardless of what your husband wants, they cannot change the locks and keep you out. What they did is illegal. It's called an illegal eviction." "But what about the loan?" I asked. "Does that change anything?" "That's an interesting question," Ms. Chen said, and she pulled out the documents I had brought with me. "Where is the formal loan agreement, the one that's signed and notarized and filed properly?" I thought about it. Marcus had never shown me a formal agreement. He had just told me that his family had given him money and that they had a verbal agreement about collateral. "I don't think there is one," I said slowly. "It seems like it was informal, just a family arrangement." Ms. Chen nodded, and she looked satisfied. "That's very important," she said. "An informal loan, especially one using marital property as collateral without both spouses' consent, doesn't have legal weight in a courtroom. You can challenge it. In fact, you can argue that they've committed fraud by claiming ownership of property they don't legally own." Over the next week, Ms. Chen and I gathered evidence. We collected every email, every text message, every piece of documentation that related to the property and the alleged loan. We created a timeline of events. We documented when his family moved in, when they started making changes, when the strange behavior began. What became clear was that the loan was completely informal. There was no written agreement. There was no notarization. There was nothing that gave them any actual legal claim to the house. It was just a family promise. A family arrangement made years ago when Marcus was young and naive. More importantly, we found something else. In several emails between Marcus's mother and sister, they discussed their real plan, and it was much worse than I had imagined. They didn't just want the money back. They wanted to force me out completely. They wanted to make me look unstable or irrational. They wanted to convince Marcus to leave me. Then, once I was gone and the house was under their control, Marcus would sell it. They would take their money, and the rest would be divided among the family. I would get nothing. Reading these emails was like discovering that the people I had been kind to, the people I had welcomed into my home, had been plotting against me the entire time. The emails showed that my mother-in-law had been planning this for at least 2 years. She had been manipulating Marcus slowly, step by step, pushing him toward this outcome. One email particularly stood out. His mother wrote, "She won't see this coming. She's too trusting. Once we separate her from the house, once she's without her anchor, she'll fall apart. Then Marcus will have to choose between her neediness and what's best for the family. He'll choose us." Reading those words, I understood that these people had never seen me as family. I had never been anything more than an obstacle to them. Ms. Chen helped me develop a legal strategy. We would file a petition to reclaim the house. We would argue that the lockout was illegal. We would present evidence that the loan was informal and therefore had no legal weight. We would request that a court declare the property entirely mine, since the alleged collateral was invalid. It was also possible, Ms. Chen explained, that this constituted fraud. They had fraudulently claimed ownership of property. They had conspired to deprive me of my rights. These were serious legal issues. Marcus tried to contact me several times before we filed anything. He called my phone. He sent emails. He asked if we could talk. He said he missed me. He said his family was being unreasonable. He said he wanted me to come home. But I didn't trust him anymore. Every time he reached out, I felt a wave of hurt and anger. I copied all of his emails to Ms. Chen. She advised me not to communicate with him directly. Anything I said could be used against me in court, she explained. I focused on preparing for the legal battle ahead. I took time off work. I met with Ms. Chen multiple times. I told her my story over and over again, making sure every detail was accurate and documented. Ms. Chen discovered something during her investigation that made my blood run cold. She subpoenaed financial records from Marcus and his family. What she found was clear evidence that his family had been planning this for years. They had been slowly manipulating Marcus, making him feel dependent on them, making him feel like he couldn't manage without their guidance and support. They had been laying the groundwork for exactly what happened to me. In one email, Marcus's mother wrote, "Once we get the house, everything will fall into place. She'll be easier to manage once she's separated from her security. Marcus will do what we need him to do." In another email from his sister, "She won't even see it coming. She's too busy with her mother to notice what we're planning." There were emails discussing how to get Marcus to feel like he was making his own decisions, when really his family was controlling everything. There were emails about putting me in a small apartment, keeping me dependent on Marcus for financial support, essentially isolating me from independence. Reading these communications, I understood that this wasn't just about a loan. This was about control. This was about power. This was about a family that saw me as someone to be removed from the equation. The first court hearing was scheduled for January. The day arrived cold and gray. I wore a dark suit and tried to look professional, even though I felt like I was falling apart on the inside. Marcus's family walked into the courthouse like they had nothing to worry about. They whispered to each other in the hallway. They seemed confident. They seemed convinced that they would win. The judge asked them to explain the loan agreement. They presented documents, but as Ms. Chen had predicted, they were incomplete. There was no proper signature. There was no notarization. There was nothing that actually proved they had a legal claim to the house. "Can you explain," the judge asked, looking directly at Marcus's mother, "how you legally transferred marital property as collateral without the consent of the other spouse?" She stammered. She tried to explain that it was a family understanding, that Marcus had agreed, that they were just trying to help. "Did the wife agree?" the judge asked. Silence filled the courtroom. "No," Ms. Chen said, standing up. "The wife had absolutely no knowledge of this arrangement. She did not consent. And more importantly, the law requires both spouses to agree to use marital property as collateral. That consent never occurred. Therefore, this so-called loan is unenforceable." Cracks started appearing in their story immediately. When Marcus's mother was pressed for details about the loan agreement, her story changed. When his sister was asked when the arrangement began, she gave a different date than his mother had stated. When his brother was asked about the documents, he admitted they were just drafted casually one evening, without any legal help or formality. The judge watched all of this happen. He was clearly noticing the inconsistencies. He was clearly seeing that their story didn't hold together. Then Marcus himself was called to testify. Ms. Chen asked him direct questions. "Did you tell your wife about this loan?" she asked. "No," Marcus admitted. "Why not?" Marcus hesitated for a long time. The courtroom was silent. Finally, he said something that changed everything. "Because I knew she would be upset. Because I knew she would tell me I was wrong to have done it. Because my family said it would be better if she didn't know." The judge's expression grew harder. I could see the disappointment in his face. Ms. Chen continued. "Did you consent to having your wife locked out of the home?" "No," Marcus said quietly, "but I didn't stop them either." Ms. Chen pressed harder. She asked Marcus about his family's real intentions. She asked him directly if his family had suggested he sell the house. His lawyer objected. The judge overruled him. Finally, Marcus broke down. He admitted everything. He admitted that his family wanted him to sell the house. He admitted that they had a plan to separate me from my home and my resources. He admitted that he had been complicit in it, even though he hadn't actively participated. But then he said something that made everyone in the courtroom stop and listen. After her mother died, Marcus said, and his voice was shaking with tears, she was broken. She was grieving so hard. I panicked. I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know how to be what she needed. My family said they knew what she needed. They said they would take care of everything. I was weak. I let them take over because I didn't know how to be strong for her. It was wrong. I was a coward. The courtroom was completely silent. Even his family looked shocked by his admission. The judge looked at Marcus for a long time. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at Marcus's family. I am going to say something, the judge began, and I want everyone in this courtroom to hear it clearly. You do not get to make a woman homeless because your family wants control. You do not get to take away someone's property rights because you think you know what's best for them. You do not get to lock someone out of their home and then present it to the court as a normal family matter. That is illegal. That is fraud. The judge turned to Marcus. You abandoned your wife when she needed you most. You let your family bully her. You betrayed her trust. That's a serious failure as a husband. Then the judge turned to his family. As for all of you, you have committed fraud. You have attempted to illegally claim property that does not belong to you. You have engaged in a conspiracy to defraud both this woman and the court. The judge struck his gavel. The lockout is declared illegal. The wife is to be restored to her home immediately. The family is to vacate the premises within 48 hours. Police escorted Marcus's family out of my house the next day. I watched from a safe distance as they carried boxes and bags to their cars. I watched as my mother-in-law's face turned red with anger. I watched as my sister-in-law refused to look at me. I watched as my brother-in-law tried to argue with the police officers about whether they really had to leave. But I felt empty watching it happen. There was no satisfaction. There was no joy, just a deep, bone-tired emptiness. The moment they were finally gone, I walked through my front door. The house was dusty. Things had been moved. My favorite reading chair was in the wrong place. The walls seemed to watch me, remembering the hands that had violated this space. I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the bed. I cried, not from sadness this time, but from the profound reality of what had happened. My marriage was effectively over. My trust was shattered. My home, though legally returned to me, felt like a stranger's house. I didn't know if I would ever feel safe here again. Over the next several weeks, I slowly began to reclaim my home. I changed all the locks. I cleaned every room, scrubbing away the feeling of invasion. I repainted the walls colors that I had chosen, not colors that his mother had suggested. I bought new furniture, deliberately replacing pieces that his family had sat in or criticized. Slowly, piece by piece, day by day, the house began to feel like mine again. My husband tried to contact me several times. He wanted to discuss the divorce. He wanted to explain himself in detail. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to know if there was any way we could work things out. I met him once at Ms. Chen's office. He was crying. He said he had made a terrible mistake. He said his family had manipulated him into abandoning me. He said he still loved me. I know you did, I said, and I meant it. I believed that he loved me in his way, but love wasn't enough. Love without loyalty, without respect, without the willingness to fight for the person you promised to spend your life with, wasn't really love at all. Marcus begged to come home. He promised that he would never speak to his family again. He promised therapy, growth, change, all the things that people promise when they realize they've lost something important. I listened to all of it. I heard the sincerity in his voice. But I also heard something else. I heard a man who was only sorry because he had been caught. I heard a man who was only willing to fight now that he had lost everything. I heard a man who was choosing me only because his family's plan had failed. I don't know if I can trust you, I said quietly. I understand, Marcus said, but please let me try to make this right. I told him no. I told him that I needed him to leave. I told him that I would be filing for divorce. I told him that I needed time to figure out who I was without him, and that maybe eventually we could be in the same room without it feeling like a betrayal. He cried, he begged, he said terrible things about himself, about his family, about his failures, but he finally left. He packed a bag and went to stay with a friend, understanding that his time in my home was over. The divorce process took several months, but because Marcus had used marital property without my consent, because his family had attempted to defraud me, the judge ruled completely in my favor. The house was mine. The savings were split, but I received significantly more because of the attempted fraud. I was awarded financial compensation for emotional distress and the violation of my rights. Marcus got the minimum possible. The house was mine. Everything inside it was mine. The life we had built together was now just mine because he had chosen to walk away from it. It took almost a year for me to feel safe in my own home again. It took therapy and time and slowly learning to trust my instincts again. But gradually, the house stopped feeling violated. It stopped feeling like a place of betrayal. It started feeling like a sanctuary. I took down all the pictures of Marcus. I cleared out his closet. I made the master bedroom completely mine again. I repainted the living room a color I loved. I rearranged the furniture according to my taste, not anyone else's. I filled the house with things that made me happy. I learned to live alone. I learned that my own company was enough. I learned that I didn't need anyone to validate my right to exist in this space. 2 years after being locked out of my own home, I sat in my living room and looked around at the space I had reclaimed. The walls were painted colors that I loved. The furniture was arranged the way I wanted it. There were no traces of anyone else, no echoes of family meetings or manipulation. I had survived something terrible. My marriage had ended. My trust had been broken. My home had been violated. But I was still here. I was still strong. I was still me. That night, I wrote a note. I wrote about what had happened, about how his family had tried to erase me, about how they had almost succeeded. But I also wrote about how the law had protected me, how I had fought back, and how I had won. I didn't send the note. I didn't feel the need to. Instead, I kept it in a drawer as a reminder of what I had overcome. It was a reminder that I had rights, that the law existed to protect those rights, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for yourself, even when it costs you everything. Because in standing up for myself, I had found myself. I had found my strength. I had found my home again.